In tip 7, I'd like to explain why every offense should have an empty formation. And what I'd like to do in this format is present the 8 reasons that I have here listed on the board, and then go back in and give you more detail as to why each of those reasons I feel is important for you to consider having an empty formation. So let's go over those 8 reasons now as a highlight as to what I'm going to talk about. The first one is, it's very easy to read the defense when you're in an empty formation. The second reason is, when you're behind by 14 points, because there's a lot of passing involved in an empty formation, you can make the game longer. And there's a specific reason as to why you would like to do that. The third reason is, you can also use your empty formation as a last drive to win the game. And there's some advantages there in doing that for your last drive. The fourth reason is, your empty formation can serve as a hurry-up offense change of pace. For example, I had a specific name called Rangers, where everybody would know where to line up and what the plays were, and it allowed us to use that at any time and any point in the game to change the pace for the defense. The fifth reason is, in the research that I did on my own team in the early 2000s, I found out that 75% of the plays that we were running on offense came from the hash mark. So you need to be able to take advantage of that wide field with three receivers. And so the empty is a good way to do that. The sixth reason is, no team has 5 good defensive backs. So when you're empty and they all go out, you're asking them to also have 5 good defensive backs to cover you, and you're able to get good favorable matchups by doing an empty set. The seventh reason is, receivers get more skill work in the offseason than the DBs. So you can have a skill advantage if you take advantage of throwing year-round with your receivers and quarterback. The eighth reason is, there's really good matchup possibilities. In other words, you can put your running backs at the number 1 wide receiver where their corners would have to cover the running back. And that creates a dilemma for the defense as to whether they want that matchup. In the same token, you can take your best wide receivers and put them at the number 3 position and then match them up with a linebacker. Once again, creating a matchup that the defense has to have an answer for if they really want to do that. So how will I know all this information? Is I spent over 15 years running empty formations. I've written books on the empty formations and how you can utilize them, but I also went a whole year of running empty. One of the high schools that I took over was the losingest high school in the state history. And my second year of being at that school, our running back, really only running back, transferred. And we did not have a running back. We tried to use a couple people to do that, but it wasn't as good as putting the next best receiver in, because it gave us better skill at those positions. So I went a whole year of running empty with no running backs. And I want to explain to you what I did and how I did that. And so the rest part of this video will be explaining in each detail each one of these 8 overviews that I have as a reason you want to consider running an empty set. The first reason why I believe every offense should have an empty formation is that it's easy to read the defense. 3 specific ways that you can read the defense and identify things that make it easy is that you can identify which side to throw to. You can also identify potential blitzers, and then you're going to restrict the pass rushers. So what I have drawn here is an empty formation with trips to the field and 2 receivers to the boundary, and I've drawn up a 4-3 cover 2 defense. And one of the things that you do when you use formations is you simply count the defenders, not just in the box, but how many are playing each side of the receivers. So if we do that from the boundary hash to the sideline, we can see that this is going to be 2 receivers on 3 with 3 defenders. That is, the safety, the will linebacker, and the corner basically playing these 2 receivers. When you come to the field, you've got 3 receivers and there's 3 defenders. On offense, you're never going to get one more player than the defense, because everybody's simply not going to line up with one less That's just not good defense, and I've never seen anybody do that in over 35 plus years of coaching. So the best we can hope for is to be even. So we're even on this side. So when you see 4-3 cover 2 and you see 2 safeties, we know that we are going to throw it to the trip side because we're even, and that's the only way on offense you can have an advantage is to be even. All right? So we know that we wouldn't want to throw 2-on-3 to that side. If they change the coverage, and let's say it becomes 4-3 cover 3, and this safety rotates down, and this corner backs up a little bit and plays in between the 2 receivers, which would put this safety over in the middle of the field, and then this corner is going to rotate and be in the middle of these 2 receivers, and the Will's going to walk out just a little bit so because he has to cover the out here. So this is 4-3 cover 3 now. So what happens when there's one safety is this now becomes 3-on-4. So we wouldn't want to throw against that. And we come over here to the boundary and we're going to be able to throw 2-on-2 into the boundary. So it's easy to identify which side to throw to. If you look at the safeties, if there's one and you're in a 3-by-2 formation, there's one safety, then you know that you're going to throw on the boundary because you're going to be 2-on-2. If there's 2 safeties, we switch this back to cover 2, or you could even say if it's cover 4, it really doesn't make any difference. Then we know that the numbers change and it's now 3-on-3 to the field and 2-on-3 to the boundary. So as a play caller, it's really easy to identify what they're doing in the secondary when you have an empty formation to know which side to throw to. It's also easy for the quarterback, so you can communicate to him, he can read this, and he knows which side to throw to. The other reason is we can identify potential blitzers. For example, we know that they're not going to blitz on this side. They're not going to blitz this Sam linebacker. If they did, that would be 2-on-3, and as I mentioned earlier, I've never seen anybody play one less versus an offensive formation. So we know he's not the potential blitzer. So when it's cover 2 or 2 safeties, we know the advantage they have is into the boundary. So we know that this Will is a potential blitzer because he's closer to get to the quarterback. But we also know we can have a key as to whether he's going to blitz or not, because this safety is going to need to move over, and they're going to end up having to play man-to-man if they bring the Will blitzer. Now, they could play zone, but in my experience, most people, if you're going to blitz this outside linebacker, then this safety moves over, and he's basically going to play man off of that. They could play zone, but basically they'll play man-to-man. All right? Now, they could blitz the corner, okay, in which case this safety then would still move over, and he'd have to take the number 1 receiver man-to-man, and the Will would take the slot receiver man-to-man. But in this easy case, we've been able to identify the blitzer by where the defense has one extra player. Okay? If we change this to 4-3 cover 3 and rotate him down and move the corner back, we now know where the potential blitzer is because they have the number advantage to the field. And we have the passive number advantage to the boundary. So we know that the Sam linebacker is a potential blitzer. I believe, once again, that the free safety is going to walk down and be his depth won't be as much because he knows that he's got to get down and end up being man-to-man across the board, playing 3-on-3 when they're going to blitz the Sam linebacker. So that's how we know we can identify the potential blitzer when you have an empty set because of where they have the numbers, okay? The third thing is we can restrict the box with regard to the pass rushers. So when you go empty, okay, I'm going to move this back to cover 2. They really only have 5 players that are in the box to rush the passer. Okay? So here's another numbers game that you can count on, all right? So if we draw a line from tackle to tackle to count the box, all right? This box now we know is 5 on 5. And we can sort that out. Because we're even, we have numbers, we can block those 5. If they want to get an extra rusher in the box, okay, so if they're 5 on 5 in the box and we're sending 5 receivers out, then we know that it's 5 receivers on 6. So they're going to use 6 pass defenders to cover our 5 receivers. If they want to get an extra person in the box, or if they want to rush this extra person so that they can be 5 linemen on 6 rushers, then we know that they're going to end up being only 5 pass defenders versus our 5 receivers, and they're going to play man-to-man, okay? The other key indicator is they're not playing man-to-man when the safety's that far off a slot receiver. So we know that we would see him move down, and we would see this safety move down and move over. So once again, by restricting the pass rushers, we've been able to identify what the coverage is, which side to throw to, and it has done a lot for us with regard to reading what the defense has to do to adjust, okay? The other thing that they can do is, now notice that if they use 6 people to rush and they only have 5 defenders, it's basically cover 0, okay? If they don't rush and they only want to use 5 rushers and they're going to play and they have 6 defenders, they can only double team one person. They can only double team one person, okay? Because their extra defender can only get one of these 5 guys. That's the other advantage I think you have, is that you can pretty much determine who they want to double team. They can only do that. If they want to rush, if they want to cover with 7 people, okay? So this Mike linebacker goes out and they're rushing 4 people, then you've restricted the box even better, and they only rush 4 and they rush 7, then theoretically they can only double cover 2 people. Okay? So this Sam linebacker could go over and help cover this, and then Mike linebacker can rotate over, but the 2 safeties can only help on 2 people in that. So I believe when you use an empty formation, because of these 3 particular advantages that you have, that you get a lot of information and make the defense adjust. And the thing that I've found in running this over the years is that if we stay stagnant, it's really easy to see and let them make the adjustments. Sometimes you run motions and you run people around and you switch and you trade, and you don't give the quarterback the information that he needs to be able to discern what side to throw to, who the potential blitzer is, as well as helping the lineman out with regard to how many pass rushers there are. So the first reason that you would consider having an empty formation is that it's pretty easy to read the defense, as I just articulated. And notice that it also doesn't matter if they play 3-4 cover 2. It's still 5 people in the box. They're just aligned differently. So whether it's 3-4 or 4-3, you still have the same opportunity to easily identify and read the defense. The second reason that I believe every offense should have an empty formation is when you're behind by 14 points, you want to make the game longer. So you really want to throw the ball every single down. And as I talked about in the first reason of how you can get numbers advantage and you can attack the defense, the other part is if you throw the ball every down, an incomplete pass, the clock stops. So in essence, you have a 3 and out, and it could take 30 seconds. And the reason you want to make the game longer is that you want to make your opponents have to play well longer. In other words, it's really hard as a coach, and I learned this from being a head coach for 23 years and taking over 4 high schools and having to change the mindset. It's really hard for the players, if you're down by 14 points, to not think, well, we're probably going to lose. But it's even harder for the team that's ahead by 14 points to not think that they're going to win. Because your opponent, when you're up 14 points, they really think they're going to win. And it doesn't matter whether that's the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, or fourth quarter. They just have that feeling they're going to win because they look at the scoreboard. Well, in order to make them play well longer, you've got to stop the clock, and you only have a limited number of timeouts. But when you throw the ball every down behind by 14, you're either going to complete the pass, so you're going to move down the field with an opportunity to score and reduce that 14-point margin, or it's going to be incomplete, and it's only going to take 30 seconds, which puts them back on the field, and then makes them play well longer. The best example I can give you of that mentality and that happening is in the Patriots Super Bowl when they were down 28-3. They came back because they played well longer than the Falcons. Well, they didn't play well earlier in the first half than the Falcons, but they made the game longer. Not only was the second half longer, but it had to go to overtime to be able to win. So they played well longer than the Falcons because, once again, the Falcons weren't just up by 14, they're up by 25 points, and that made it even more a mental problem for them in thinking that they're going to win. The third reason is you got to train your defensive players and coaches for this mindset that when you're behind by 14 points, you're going to throw it every down. And the reason I say that is everybody comes to the conclusion that you want to make long offensive drives so your defense can rest. And I've never understood that because to me it's about scoring as many points as possible. And I wanted to have our defense understand that our offense is going to score 40 points. And that may mean that you're going to be on the field quicker. Because if we scored in 2 plays or 3 plays, we have 7 points. That's a lot better to play defensive with than to sit on the bench and know that you're going to win a game and you can only score 14 points. So you have to train their mindset to understand that if you're in an offense that's going to score 40 or 50 points, they're getting on the field relatively quickly from series to series, okay? But the thing you have to tell them is that it's not the offense that you're playing that determines how many snaps that they take for a drive. In other words, we can stop our opponent 3 and out anytime we want. How? If we do our alignment, our assignment, and our read correctly, and we play our fundamentals. We get off blocks and we make tackles. So the idea that the defense has to play X amount of snaps because the other offense is making these drives and tiring them out, I think is wrong. Because if you do things right, it's the defense. You determine how many snaps your offensive opponent takes. So you can get them 3 and out anytime you want. And once I got our defensive coaches and players to understand that mindset, then it switched around, and when we were in this situation, we executed really well on both sides of the ball. The other thing I said is, why would you ever want to go sit on the bench for as long as possible to rest? Number one, you're not in shape to play. Number two, don't you want to play? So the idea that the offense should have these long drives to help the defense rest, number one, if I'm a defender, I would want to play. And number two, I know as a defender, if we can stop them anytime we want by playing better than the other opponent's offense. Okay? But you've got to tell them and prepare them for this scenario. You can come up with a key word when you're behind by 14 points that tells everybody on the team that, hey, this is the game situation that we're now in, and we're going to, which is we're going to make the game longer. And I used to tell our guys that when it got behind by 14 points, we're going to make it a 7-on-7 game. Okay? So we're going to throw the ball every down. We're going to either get out real quick or we're going to score, and we're going to make them play better longer. And what ends up happening is you develop a lot of good mental toughness. The defense knows, hey, we got to help the offense out and get this ball back. And we're not worried about resting on the bench or things like that. The other thing is it also creates a mindset of turnovers. So several times in games, and I learned this because I was behind by 14 points, and we were able to throw the ball really well, and I experienced and saw what happened when we actually did this, and we threw the ball every down, went in our empty formation, and I saw us flip a lot of games because we had this mentality between our offense and defense. We're going to throw it every down. You guys are going to get back on the field. You're going to attack them and be aggressive and try to get turnovers, and we're going to flip that 14-point advantage. So I think the second reason is if you're behind by 14 points and you use this empty formation, combined with the first reason of being able to read the defense easy, identify blitzers, etc., you can create a mentality where it doesn't matter how many points you're down. You can have a game situation for your offense and defense that will allow you to come from behind. The third reason of what I believe why every offense should have an empty formation is that you can use this in a last drive to win the game. And this philosophy that I have came from Bill Walsh. And Coach Walsh tells the story of when he was the offensive coordinator at Cincinnati Bengals when Paul Brown was the head coach. And they needed a last drive to win the game, and he's sitting in the press box, and the window to the press box is open. And the Raiders fans knew where he was, and they knew he was calling plays. And so when this drive started, they started throwing things in the window at him to distract him. And what happened was he didn't call very good plays, and they didn't go down the field and win. They lost the game. And so on the plane ride on the way home, he was debriefing himself and saying, okay, that's a scenario where I'm trying to get the best plays, or do I really want to worry about the players executing at a high level and giving us a better chance to win? So he decided that he was going to come up with 3 plays that they were going to run in these last drive to win the game scenarios, no matter what it was. When that plays happened, they were running those 3 plays. And he was going to rely on players' execution as opposed to coming up with the perfect plays in those scenarios. So I copied that particular philosophy from Coach Walsh, and I use an empty formation for my last drive to win the game. And we use 3 scripted pass plays, just like he had done. And our pass routes are 3, 4, and 5. And I call our pass routes by numbers because I believe it's easier to disguise the numbers than it is names. Because you have to flip names all the time, or people remember the names, I believe, on defense a little bit easier. So our players knew that if it was the last drive to win the game, we were going to rely on their execution. We were going to run the same 3 plays over and over. If we got to our 5 route, we would go back to the 3 route, and we were going to rely on their execution. We were going to practice this 3 or 4 times a week, and we were going to make sure that they were proficient at what they were doing. And because of what I told you before about how easy it was to read the defense and the first reason for having an empty, the quarterback would come to the line of scrimmage and he would literally pick out who he wanted to throw to based on where the defense was aligned, because we had trained him to do that over and over. So what we would do is we would run our 3 pass route first, which the X had a comeback, the A had a fade, the B was running the shallow, or what we called a slant, in that he went under every linebacker that was at the second level. The Z ran a skinny post, and the W ran a hitch. So basically what we had is we had the ability to throw short routes to beat any blitzers. We had home run throws on either side, and then we had an intermediate throw. So we had every down and distance covered with regard to that on a 3 route. In the green, we would run the 4 route. In this case, the X was running the skinny post. The A was the shallow or the slant, running under the linebackers. So if the quarterback got blitzed and he needed to dump it, he had an outlet there. The B was running an arrow out to 5 yards. Once again, if there was a blitzer coming from the wide side, he could throw this route. The Z was running what I call an in route, or be a 7-step curl, which put him at about 10 yards. Okay? And I call it an in route because I wanted to remind the receivers always turn into the quarterback. And then the W was the home run throw on this side, and he was running an inside takeoff. And so that he was always going to release inside any defender on him, and then climb him and head to the outside. Okay? Then when we would go with our 5 route, the X was the blitz beater to the boundary, and he was running an out. The A became the home run throw, which is a post. The B was the blitz beater to the field by running a hitch. The Z was a fade, which was the home run field to the field, and the W was an out. So we had a short, intermediate, and home run throw on every single one of these plays. And these were plays that we ran all the time, but we packaged them together to do this last drive to win the game. So, and we relied on the player's execution to do that. The other consideration that you would have in this is, do you want the receivers to stay on the same side, the 2 to the left and the 3 to the right, or do you want to flip the trips to the wide side? Depending on how much time was left in the game when we had this last drive to win the game, if there was enough time, I always had the trips go to the wide side. I tell them to flip. Because you throw a pass and complete it, and there's plenty of times when they know where the ball's going to be snapped from, where it's down, that they can get to the trip side, plenty of time to line up and run the next play. If we were like 45 or 50 seconds left in the game with no timeouts, then sometimes I would tell them stay on the same side. We don't have enough time to flip. So they would just stay on the right or the left, depending on which side I wanted them, and then they would stay on the right or left. And we just stay on the same side and run the routes. And we practice that in terms of the spacing with the trips into the boundary. So those are the considerations that you want to have. But I really believe that using Coach Walsh's philosophy on the last drive to win the game, that you should rely on a player's execution, script your plays, and then just let the players execute to win the game. This is the fourth reason why I believe every offense should have an empty formation. And that is, you want to have a hurry-up offense as a change of pace to be able to change what the defense can call and what they can't call in terms of attacking your formation, and particularly your empty formation. So in doing this, I gave this a name, Rangers. And once again, that set the mental tempo that I wanted them to understand, that we were specifically going to line up in one formation. We were going to run 3 pass plays that repeated over and over. And when we did this, we weren't going to huddle, and we weren't going to use a cadence. And anytime we didn't use a cadence, I called that Rambo. And I did that because in those Rambo films, he rarely talked, and he was able to execute whatever he was doing with just good mental toughness. So I picked words, Rangers and Rambo, that kind of set the mental tone for what I wanted them to do. Okay? So basically, we could go out at any time in the series. We could do it as a series before the series started and tell them that, hey, next series we're going Rangers. Or we could do it in the middle of a series. So if we're on play number 5 and we're moving down the field and all of a sudden we want to switch to a no huddle, no cadence tempo, we could just yell Rangers, Rangers. And if the personnel wasn't in the game in this empty formation that we needed, everybody knew what personnel that we wanted in the game. They knew how to line up in our formation, whatever empty formation that I chose to use. And they also knew that we wouldn't huddle and we wouldn't use a cadence. The significance of not using a cadence, and I've done all this by experience, is that the defense hears a cadence no matter what it is, and it kind of clues them as to when the ball might be snapped. But if you go without a cadence, they have no idea, particularly the defensive linemen when their hands in the dirt and they have to watch the ball and they don't hear anything. It really freezes the defense. That's what I found. And I learned this because as a head coach, I helped plan the defense also, and that when we did it to our own defense, I found them from watching our practice film that they were really late in terms of doing their read and getting to where they needed to go when there wasn't a cadence. So I decided I would do this in the game, and it worked exactly the same way. I found that whenever I went to my hurry-up offense change-up Rangers, and I went Rambo, which is no huddle, no cadence, the defense became less reactive and reacted later to what their key was when they did that. Okay? I wrote a book on this topic. If you want more detail on it, it's called The Last Drive to Win the Game, Rangers. And you can find that on my website if you go to coaching books and go to offense and scroll down, and you can find that there. I want to tell you a story about how I changed the defensive coordinator's call sheet. So we played a team, and they had hired a college defensive coordinator to come in and do their defense. And we played on a Friday night when it rained because we had a turf field. And the other team did not play, they played on Saturday. So we went to scout them. And what I saw their defensive coordinator would have everybody look to the sideline to him, and he would call a player a number, and they would look at their wristband, and the defense would know what to play. So I thought, we have Rangers and Rambo already installed, and we've run them successfully. What if I did that with a couple other formations? And I switched formations every single series, because I felt like if I came out in my empty set and ran Rangers the first time, and we didn't call any cadence, that he would probably be smart enough to adjust with that. But then if I came out and I switched the formation, and let's say I went to what we call hurricanes or double set and put the B in the backfield and had a 3 to 5 play sequence, and they didn't all have to be passes in each formation. And I did that the next series, and we did Rambo, which was no huddle, no cadence. And he would have it prepared and thought we were going to come back in the empty set. So I did this with several formations that we had. One other one is I put a tight end in the game and took the W off, and we did it in that. And then we also did it in a 3-by-1. But you can do this with any formations. So I want to tell you what happened when I picked 4 formations and we went Rambo, and we had a specific sequence of plays for each of those. And I used 5 plays in those sequences, and it was a pass, pass, run, pass, pass. So what happened was we were up 28-0 after the first 4 drives because of going this hurry-up change-up and using Rambo and changing the formation. The other thing it did, it gave me now 4 other formations that I did this with, so that any formation at any time, either during a series or before a series, we could go into this hurry-up Rambo. And so we were a no-huddle team, but I don't believe in having to go fast because I don't think it confuses the good teams. So we didn't huddle, but the players knew exactly where to line up because we would signal in the formation. But when we did this hurry-up and we went Rambo with no huddle and no cadence, and we went a little faster, what I found was it really put the defense in a bind and not being able to react as well to what we were doing. So I recommend on tip 4 that you think about putting in a hurry-up offense change-up, naming it, come up with one empty formation, teach that, and then see if that might transfer over to your other formations. The last 4 reasons that I believe every offense should have an empty formation are, first, 75% of the plays are run from the hashes. In the early 2000s, when I started getting into the empty formations, I did a survey at the end of our season of all the plays, over 700 plays we ran, and 75% of those plays were on a hash mark. And so, particularly in high school football, from the hash mark all the way to the other side is basically 37 yards. So we wanted to take advantage of this wide open field by spacing them out. Since we knew that we were gonna be on the hash 75% of the time, I changed my practice schedule so that I practice on the hashes 75% of the time, and I started focusing on being able to attack the field part of this because it's so much space for the defense to cover. And if you look at this now, basically I have 3 receivers and they have 3 defenders because this is a 4-3 cover 2, as I did in the first reason. And these 3 could go anywhere in this particular, from the middle of the field over, it's 27 yards. So they have 3 receivers to cover 3 guys that can cover 27 yards with their routes. So we wanted to take advantage of that, so we started really emphasizing our empty formations, or even our 3x1 where we would move the back into the backfield, because we knew that we were going to play on a hash 75% of the time. The other reason, as I believe, is nobody has 5 good defensive backs. At every level of football, the one thing you know is that they'll always take their best defender, put it on your best receiver, because they wouldn't have to do that if all the other defensive backs were as good as the guy that was the best defensive back. So nobody really has 5 good defensive backs, and particularly in high school, sometimes you're lucky if they have 1 good defensive back. So we felt like we could get an advantage there of making all 5 defensive backs, which basically is 4 defensive backs and a linebacker, have to cover receivers. So that's another reason why we worked on our empty formation, because we could create that. The other thing is, receivers were getting a lot more skill work in the offense than the DBs and the linebackers. We could take kids and they would love to go out and throw and catch all year round. You have trouble with defensive backs and linebackers trying to get the same kind of skill work, because when you play defense, you're always reacting to what you see in terms of the other person with your key. Not that the DBs couldn't go out and do it, but I've done individual instruction after I retired for 10, 12 years now. And I always tell all the guys that come, and quarterbacks with their receivers, where's all the DBs out here? You never see a defensive back just go out and go through his back pedals by himself. You never see linebackers just on their own go out and do drops. They always need somebody else to run a route so that they can key and they can react to somebody else. So the 4 high schools I took over, when we put the passing game in, I sold them this concept that if you'll just come throw and catch and run routes and get good at it, you're going to have advantage over the defensive backs and the linebackers, because you're going to get more skill work in the off season. The other reason, the 8th reason, is if you go empty and you put your running backs at number 1 and your wide receivers at the number 3, you have a really good matchups that they have to make decisions for. For example, in this case, our X and our W are at the wideouts, which would be our base empty formation that you've seen. But if we take the A and the B, which are basically running backs that are also good receivers, and we move them to the outside, the question now becomes, do you want your corners, who are typically the best defensive backs, covering our running backs? Or, because now we have a good slot receiver on the same linebacker, and we have another good receiver on the safety. So in essence, we're going to work 2-on-2 with 2 really good receivers against a safety who's lined up 10 to 12 yards deep and a linebacker who's 5 yards deep. But here's the other question. How many times in practice did their linebacker cover passes? Well, if you're like most typical people, all the linebackers are going to do is stop the run, and then you give them a little bit of pass coverage. But if they're going to play us that week and they have to play our empty formation, that guy all week better be in pass coverage, and he better learn to play man-to-man. Okay? Now, they could change the formation or the defensive structure, and they could come over here like I've articulated in another part of the video, and they could add another guy, the free safety, so now that they can play 3-on-2 with those guys, but they're still stuck with a running back that if they play cover 2, this whole area is wide open and I can dump it to a running back on a hitch or a speed out or something like that, and I now got the equivalent of like if I was running tall sweep, because we can take a 1-step, throw it to him, and the running back in space with a receiver blocking is a really good matchup for us. So these type of reasons, and particularly the matchups, really give you a lot of options when you do an empty set. I had to play an entire season in empty, as I mentioned earlier in the video, because I didn't have a running back. He transferred and I was in a program that we're rebuilding. Tried a couple other kids at running back, and the next best players were really another 2 receivers, so we put them in and ran empty the whole year. And I used 5 empty formations. For example, I took the W and the Z, and I put them over here, and I put the X and the A over there. And we still ran the same routes. Wherever I put them, they ran their routes on our plays. But now you have those kind of matchups. And then you can even, if X is your best receiver, you can even switch them and put the X there. So what I got down to is I got down to 5 empty formations, our base, and then some of these other ones. But it changed the matchups because now you have to find our best receivers and figure out how you want to cover those best receivers as we move people around. So I believe with the things that I've given you, hopefully I've given you food for thought about the possibilities of running an empty set and be able to use that to attack the defenses you're going to play in a way that maybe they're not prepared for. So I know by now, if I have you interested in exploring an empty set even more, that the question always becomes, how do you pass protect an empty? Because I'm worried about the quarterback getting hit if they send 6 guys and I only have 5 blockers. Well, fortunately, I coached offensive line for 17 years of my 23 years as a head coach. And I have a system that I can explain to you, but that you also can get a book that I wrote called Pass Protection with No Tight Ends. You can go to my website under coaching books, or you can go to Amazon and Google my name with that and find that book. But let's go over a brief summary of how we do that. So how do you pass protect an empty or with no tight end? Because you just don't have to be an empty. You could have a running back in the backfield. But I never used the running back as a pass protector. I always sent the running back out so that I had 5 receivers every time. But in this case, our rule is if you're covered, you have that man, period. So if I'm the right tackle, I'm covered by the 5. The right guard is covered by the 3. So they are man-to-man, no help. The center is covered by the 0 shade, so he has a 0 shade, and the left tackle is covered by the 5. Now there's one interesting thing about when you have no tight end is that they're always either going to play 5 or 4 techniques. So the pass protection for the tackles is really simple. You're blocking the man that's on you because somebody will cover you, either as a 5 technique or inside 4 technique. Okay? So it's really the guards that have decisions to make. If you're uncovered, we do what we call a spider technique. And that is the ball snapped and he just takes a little 1 yard back depth and he watches the linebacker. So this left guard has the Mike linebacker. I never help with an offensive lineman that's covered unless his backer doesn't come, then he can go find help on this side. The reason I believe that is it's a game 11 on 11. And if I've got to go help on the shade, then there's something wrong with the guy that I have in there or the techniques that I'm coaching him. I'm not saying that shade couldn't be better, but if I cover his body and put my hands right on his breastplate and I just fight him, I've had kids that are 180 go against guys that are 250, all conference, all state, and they don't make a sack because we cover their body and we fight them until the ball's out. Now, we make sure the quarterback gets the ball out on time too, which helps that. Okay? And if this is a 3-4, the tackles are covered, so they have theirs. The center's covered, he has his, and both of these are spiders. Now, what does that do for us? He has Mike linebacker to the other linebacker that would be out here. If the Mike doesn't come and the outside linebacker Sam comes, then he's going to go and block him and trap him. And the same thing on this side. So basically it's a double read, inside to outside. They can get there and they can do that if you practice that over and over. If you have the wrong type of personnel, which I did when I originally did this, and you have bigger guys at these guards, and bigger I mean those 300-pound guys that can't move, then you're going to be in trouble either way. But you need to put guards in there that are a little bit more mobile, and it can be a little undersized, and it really won't matter. Okay, I've done this with big guys, little guys, guys with less ability or better ability. It just doesn't matter. But then the question becomes, what if they rush 6 men? Now the advantage that you have there is they only have 5 DBs, and an empty you're gonna put out 5 receivers, so you know that they're gonna have to play cover 0. Okay, but if we came up and we saw 6 guys at the line of scrimmage, we would make what we call a 6 guns. And these are the linemen that are doing this. The quarterback's not doing this, okay? If we see 5 guys, we make a 5 guys call. And the linemen call this, the quarterback hears 5 guys, and he knows that he's basically protected. it's going to be 5 on 5. If he hears a lineman call 6 guns, then basically he knows he has the last guy to his right side if he's a right-handed quarterback. If he's a left-handed, we would call 6 guns and they would go to the right, okay, and block the guy to their right. So we're always going to protect the backside of the quarterback. In this case, it's a right-handed quarterback. So he's got this rusher. He's going to be a little wider even if it's a 5 technique, and a lot of times it could be an outside backer. So we know that he has time with 5 yards deep taking a 1-step drop, that he has time to get the ball out. And obviously we practice that over and over. But when they hear 6 guns, the outs guy on the right, on a right-handed quarterback tree, and everybody blocks the guy to their left. Okay? So here's the other part of what we do to make this work, because you can't just try to protect everything without involving the quarterback and the receiver steps and getting the ball out on time and rhythm. All right? So we have 6 guns, and this is a play. He hears the call. He knows that he has this is quarterback's man, and that they're playing man-to-man. Now here's the rules for the receivers. Okay, when they see that, they will run no stems. So they're just going to stutter and release at the line of scrimmage, and there's really only 3 routes you can throw to get the ball out quick and defeat this. And there's really only 3 routes you can throw against man-to-man in particular, because every other route that breaks, the DB has time to react and get in the throwing lane. So we're going to run a no-stem slant with the A, the B, or the X. So they're going to stutter, and they're going to get down the line as quick as possible, and the quarterback will take a 1-step and give it to them. Okay? We're going to run a fade with the A, the B, the X, or the Z. So any one of these 4 can run a fade if we have to make a 6-gun call. And then the other thing is we would run an out with the A and the B, and it would be an arrow out. And what I mean by that is an arrow route is they're going to stutter, and they're going to go straight to the sideline at a depth of 5 yards. Okay? So he'd stutter release and 5-yard depth. So we would do that with the slant, the fade, and the out. And if you notice, the common theme of those 3 routes is they're all running away from the defender. So we're going to make the defender chase our receivers. So this is how we protect it. This is what we do. And to take them out of that, because what happens is if you throw this arrow out and you hit this receiver, there's nobody else there, and they run for a lot of yardage. And we've taken guys out of rushing 6 people against us by being able to throw these particular routes, the slant, the fade, and the out, because they run away from defenders. So that's a quick overview of how you would protect in an empty, or really not just an empty, or with pass protect with no tight ends.